Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi and good day everyone. In this presentation, we will be talking about related party disclosure based on MFRS 1 to 4. In this presentation, we will be talking about the objective of the disclosure, the required disclosure, and identifications of the related parties. But before we go into details of the short standard, let us look at the overview of the standard. The first question that we want to ask is, do we have related parties as defined by MFRS 1 to 4? If we do, then we have to disclose some information required by the standard. As you can see, the decision to make is quite easy. If we have the related parties disclosed, as simple as that. The challenge for us lies in identifying the related parties. So we need to really pay close attention to those we have transactions with and decide if they are in fact related parties as per MFRS 1 to 4. The first thing that I want to make clear to everyone is that having related parties or having business transactions with them is normal, even if that means we would have a special price or a special deal. We take over another company for business strategy. So if we sell to them or vice versa at cost or at a price lower than we sell to external party, that is acceptable. That is what we want from the alliance in the first place. Nothing wrong with that. The standard recognizes that fact. Therefore, the objective of the standard is to disclose that fact so that users understand why, for example, an entity decided to discontinue certain operation or to expand certain operation. Users need to understand that these decisions were made perhaps because of the relationship that the company has with other companies. And as we understand in business, decisions like these will most definitely affect the profit or loss reported by the company. The standard wants to draw attention to that possibility, and this may also affect assessments made by users in relation to their own economic decisions, including assessments of the risks and opportunities facing the company. Before we discuss who these related parties are, best if we talk about the required disclosure first, since discussion on identifying related parties will be much longer and need more attention than the disclosure. For parents and subsidiaries, they must disclose their relationship, name of the parents and the ultimate controlling party, and the most senior parents that produce consolidated financial statements if the immediate parents and ultimate controlling party are not required to prepare the statement. For key management personnel, henceforth KMP, their compensations must be disclosed in terms of the listed categories here. But if the KMP is actually assigned by another entity, perhaps the parent company, the disclosure here is not required. If the entity has transactions with its related parties, the nature of the relationship must be disclosed with the information about the transactions and the outstanding balances from that transactions, if any. This disclosure is in addition to what already required by paragraph 17 previously. Specifically for key management personnel from another entity, the standard also required the amounts of any provision in relation to their services to the entity. The standard lists down the disclosure that fulfills its requirements in paragraph 18 at minimum, which include the amounts of the transactions, the outstanding balances, the term and conditions under the transactions, and details of any guarantees given or received between them, provision for doubtful debts related to the outstanding amounts, and the expense recognized as bad debt from the related parties. Paragraph 19 further requires that the earlier disclosures be made separately for each of the listed category, which include its parent, entities with joint control of or significant influence over the entity, its subsidiaries, its associates, its joint venture where it is a joint venturer and not just participant, key management personnel of the entity or its parent, and other related parties, that is, other than those listed in A to F, which may mean other individuals that fulfill the definitions of related parties. Paragraph 21 lists down 10 examples of the transactions between related parties, which includes purchases, sales, leases, and provisions of guarantees or collateral. For full list of the examples, you may refer to paragraph 21. For all of the transactions, an entity is allowed to aggregate the items of a similar nature unless separation is necessary for an understanding of the effects of related party transactions on the financial statements of the entity. For entities that are government-related entities, they are exempted from disclosure requirements in paragraph 18. That is, if a government has control or joint control of or significant influence over the reporting entity, and it has a related party that also being controlled or jointly controlled by the same government or significantly influenced by the same government. Let's consider this example, taken from the illustrative example of the standard. Government G directly or indirectly controls entities 1 and 2 and entities A, B, C, and D. So here, entities 1, 2, A, B, C, and D are all government-related entities. Let's say there is also person X, which is a member of the key management personnel of entity 1. For entity A's financial statements, the exemption in paragraph 25 applies to transactions with government G and transactions with entities 1 and 2 and entities B, C, and D, as all of these entities are also controlled by the same entities that control entity A. However, that exemption does not apply to transactions with person X. If the exemption applies, the reporting entity must disclose the name of the government and its relationship, as well as the information about the nature and amount of their transactions individually if the transactions are significant, and for transactions that are not individually significant but collectively significant, entity must disclose the quantitative or qualitative indications of their extent. In determining the level of detail to be disclosed as per paragraph 26b for government-related entities, the standard suggests to consider the closeness of the related party relationship and other factors relevant in establishing the level of significance of the transaction. These are some of considerations that should be taken into account in making your judgment. We need to assess the size of the transaction, whether it is carried out on non-market terms, is the transactions outside the normal day-to-day business operation, is there a requirement to disclose to any regulatory or supervisory authorities, is there a requirement to report to senior management, or is it subject to shareholders' approval? All of these indicate the significance of the transaction. Otherwise, if, for example, the transaction is part of a normal day-to-day sales, just like sales made to other external parties or regular customers, then it will be considered as insignificant. Identifying related parties. We know that related parties can be either a person or an entity. Let's first talk about a person. A person is considered as a related party to a reporting entity if that person has control or joint control of the reporting entity, meaning he or she may own 50% or more interest in the reporting entity or has control by other arrangement. Or, if not having control, he or she has a significant influence, which again could be achieved if he or she own more than 20% but less than 50% interest in the reporting entity, or by other arrangement. Or, if not having interest in the reporting entity, he or she is a member of the key management personnel of the reporting entity, or of a parent of the reporting entity, since parents will have control over the entity. Therefore, parents' key management personnel will, in a way, be part of key management personnel of the reporting entity, since they could be the one deciding on main activities of the reporting entity. So these are the persons or individuals who are considered as related parties to the reporting entity. In addition, A close member of the persons in 1 to 3 above will also be considered as related parties to the reporting entities. A close member of the person previously described are those who may be expected to influence or be influenced by that person in their dealings with the reporting entity. So if we have the person as described previously as a male individual, a close member of this person include his spouse or wife, the children of the person and their spouses, the children of the spouse or the wife, where perhaps the person married the wife while the wife already has her own children from previous marriage, and dependents of the person that may include parents who depends on the person or adopted children or anyone that the person recognized as his dependents. Key management personnel is defined by the standard as referring to those persons having authority and responsibility for planning, directing, and controlling the activities of the entity, either directly or indirectly, including any directors, whether executive or otherwise, of that entity. So we can imagine those with the positions of director, chief executive operations, or general manager being the key management personnel because of their authority and responsibility for the planning, directing, and controlling the activities of the company. Consider this situation, again taken from the illustration example of the standard. A person X has 100% interest in entity A and is a member of the key management personnel of entity C. Entity B has 100% investment in entity C. For entity C's financial statements, entity A is related to entity C because X controls entity A and is a member of the key management personnel of entity C. Entity A is also related to entity C if X is a member of the key management personnel of entity B and not entity C. The same can be said if X has joint control over entity A. But if X has only significant influence over entity A and not control or joint control, then entities A and C would not be related to each other, but X remains as a related party to entity A. In its original positions, for entity A's financial statements, entity C is related to entity A because X controls A and is a member of entity C's key management personnel. The same can be achieved if X has joint control over entity A. The outcome will also be the same if X is a member of key management personnel of entity B and not entity C. For entities B consolidated financial statements, entity A is a related party of the group if X is a member of the key management personnel of the group. Consider this example where X has an investment in entity A and entity B. For entity A's financial statements, if X controls or jointly controls entity A, entity B is related to entity A when X has control, joint control, or significant influence over entity B. The same can be achieved in the same situation in the financial statements of entity B. But if X has significant influence over both entity A and entity B, entities A and B are not related to each other. However, X remains as related party to both entity A and entity B. Let's try another one. In this example, X is the spouse of Y. X has investment in entity A and Y has an investment in entity B. If their investments at least give them significant influence, X will be related party to entity A and Y will be related party to entity B. For entity A's financial statements, if X controls or jointly controls entity A, entity B is related to entity A when Y has control, joint control or significant influence over entity B. The same can be said in the financial statements of entity B. If X has significant influence over entity A and Y has significant influence over entity B, entities A and B are not related to each other. However, X remains as related party to entity A and Y remains as related party to entity B. Now let's discuss a related party that itself an entity. An entity is a related party if any of the following conditions applies. First, the entity and the reporting entity are members of the same group, which means that each parent, subsidiary, and fellow subsidiary is related to the others. Second, one entity is an associate or joint venture of the other entity, or an associate or joint venture of a member of a group of which the other entity is a member. So if my entity is an associate or a joint venture to your entity, our entities are related parties to each other. Third, both entities are joint ventures of the same third party. Thus, the two entities are related parties to each other. In other words, joint venturers of the same joint venture are related parties to each other. Fourth, one entity is a joint venture of a third entity, and the other entity is an associate of the third entity. In other words, if my entity has an associate and a joint venture, they are related parties to each other. Fifth, the entity is a post-employment benefit plan for the benefit of employees of either the reporting entity or an entity related to the reporting entity. In other words, if my company used the service of KWSP as a provider of post-employment benefits plan for my employees, KWSP is my company's related party. KWSP is also my company's related party if it does not provide service to my company but provides service to my subsidiary or my associate or my joint venture, the three entities that are related to my company. To KWSP, my company as the sponsoring employer to the post-employment benefit to my employees, my company is related party in its financial statement. 6. The entity is controlled or jointly controlled by a person identified in A, thus the entity is related party to the person. 7th, a person identified in A1 has significant influence over the entity or is a member of the key management personnel of the entity or of a parent of the entity. Thus the entity is related party to the person. 8. The entity or any member of a group of which it is a part provides key management personnel services to the reporting entity or to the parents of the reporting entity. The transactions between related parties is defined by a transfer of resources, services, or obligations regardless of the price. Let's consider this example. It would be beneficial if you have paragraph 9b with you together with this example. Here we have a group that consists of a parent, subsidiary A, subsidiary B, and subsidiary C, as well as associate 1 and associate 2 of parent and associate 3 of subsidiary C. For parent separate financial statements, subsidiaries A, B, and C and associate 1, 2, and 3 are related parties. For subsidiaries A's financial statement, parents, subsidiaries B and C and associate 1, 2, and 3 are related parties. For subsidiaries B separate financial statements, parent, subsidiaries A and C and associate 1, 2, and 3 are related parties. For subsidiary C's financial statements, parents, subsidiaries A and B and associate 1, 2, and 3 are related parties. For the financial statements of associate 1, 2, and 3, parents and subsidiaries A and B and C are related parties. Associate 1, 2, and 3 are not related to each other. For parents' consolidated financial statements, associates 1, 2, and 3 are related to the group because they are associates to members of the group. Now let's say entity A has both joint control over entity B and joint control or significant influence over entity C. For entity B's financial statements, entity C is related to entity B. Similarly, for entity C's financial statements, entity B is related to entity C. For this structure, entities B and C are related parties to entity A, as well as related parties to each other. IFRS Community has prepared a related parties web based on personal relationship as well as based on capital relationships. You may refer them in its website under IS24. BDO also came up with a related parties web. You may refer to it to help you understand the related parties, either individuals or entities. I have also uploaded this in your Putra Plus. So that is all about related parties. Just remember, the concern of this standard is to ensure that reporting entity provides sufficient disclosure about its related parties and the transactions that it has with them. But the challenge for us is in identifying who the related parties are. Until next time, thanks very much for tuning in. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.